Now, this is again, this only allows you to have a single user, right? And because there's only one single variable, right? On the server, the way we're keeping track of who's logged in is just we have a reference here of the object that represents the currently logged in user. So only one user is logged in at any one time. So for instance, if you here in where is it? Here we have Alice is logged in. See, Alice is logged in. But notice if I go to say Safari, where's Safari here? Let's so this is a completely different browser. If I click on profile, notice that I'm also logged in Safari. See that? And that's because two completely different browsers. One of them could be running halfway across the world, right? If they hit the same server, the same URL, the server is going to respond the same way, right? There's no mechanism here that the browser can distinguish one request from one browser, halfway across the world from another browser, just around the corner, right? It just responds the same thing, right? It's basically going out to the server, right? And the server is just responding the current user, right? You go to the profile, you're going to tell you, yeah, this person is logged in, okay? That's not really what we want, right? We want to be able to support multiple users, right? Each independently being able to communicate with the server. So let's do that. Okay, let me close that. All right, so how do we do that? Okay, so the way we're going to do that is that we're going to install Express Session, right? We're going to be using cookies. So cookies are tokens that browsers send to the server so that the server can distinguish, who's the request coming from, right? So that if it's coming from Safari or from Chrome or from anywhere, or if it's going from halfway across the world, each one will have a different cookie, right? And so I will be able to have a conversation independently with everyone, right? And this is going to be fairly transparent to the code, right? We just have to set it up. Once we set it up, right, it just works just like magic, right? But we need to set up a few things, right? First of all, we're going to tell Course. Right now, Course allows communication from anywhere, right? Our current implementation of the configuration for Course is that it's just open to everybody, right? When the browsers come to me saying, "Hey, is it okay if you get a request from this other domain?" We are always responding yes. Yeah, it's good. But when you start working with cookies and multiple users and sessions and whatnot, you can't do that, right? We need to tighten this up a little bit. It says, wait a minute, I need to make this a little more secure, right? And so what we're going to do is that we're going to, yes, allow from different places in the world, but always through the client, the user interface that we wrote, right? So we wrote the React application client, and so since we own that and we own the server, it is okay for them to talk to one another, but not just anyone, right? Not just anyone who knows the IP address and the URL can talk to us, right? Not just anyone. So it has to be the request coming from someone who's been vetted, that we know it's secure. So the way we're going to do that, right, is by going to Course and say, okay, first we're going to turn on credentials, right, to secure this a little bit, like that, right? And also I'm going to say, well, I'm not going to accept requests from anyone. I'm going to accept it from a URL that I know I can trust, right? In our case, right, it's going the URL from Netlify, right? So when this is running remotely on Heroku or from render.js, render.com, right? We're going to put here and put the URL of the Netlify application, right? And if the requests come from there, the server is going to say, oh, okay, I trust this guy, right? I trust requests that are coming from my user interface that I wrote, right? Now locally, the requests are going to come in from localhost 3000. That's where our React application is running locally on our machine, right? So either one works. And so yeah, so if it comes from these requests, we're good, right? Course is going to allow the conversation to go through. Okay. The next thing we're going to turn on, we're going to install a library to deal with cookies. Because we don't really want to work with cookies, right? Cookies is very low level. So what Sessions does is that it creates an API around the cookies, right? So that we don't have to deal with so much low level handling of headers and things like that, right? So then we need to import it. So let's import it right before our session here, our Express. And yep. And then we're going to configure and do right here like that. We're going to say right after course, right here. Here's course. So right after course, there it is. Here's our course. Even before our JSON, right? We're going to tell the server, hey, yeah, I turned on the course. Now I'm going to configure the options for the session. I'm going to tell the server always use this session. So session is the library that we just installed. Right here, we just installed Express Session, right? And then we're configuring to say that in every request, regardless of whether it's a get, a post, a put, a delete, right? On every single type of request, always check to see if there are cookies. Right? If there are no cookies, then create cookies, right? Create a brand new cookie. If the request doesn't have any cookies, create a brand new cookie, right? And then send it back in the response, right? It's all through headers, HTTP headers, right? And the browsers understand these headers, and so it'll receive the cookie from the server, it'll store it, and so next time that it talks to the same server, to the same domain, right? It'll see that it has a cookie for that domain. It'll send back the cookie next time around, right? And so in the request, it says, "Oh, I have a cookie for you," right? So now I can have a conversation specifically with you, right? So anyway, it's configured. So this, as it stands like that, this would work, but it would only work locally, right, on our machine. But we want to configure our server to also work on, AWS or render.com or Heroku, right? And to do that, right, we're going to create an environment file, right, where we're going to be able to locally we're gonna tell it where our database is, right? Where we're already using the env, right? Not only the Mongo connection string, but we're also gonna configure, where the request we're expecting it from, where is our netlify URL and all that, right? Locally, it's localhost 3000, right? But when this gets deployed to render.com, right, the netlify URL will be something else, right? So let's copy that, and in our env, right, we're going to add a few things. Yeah, okay, we got that. So right now we're also making sure that the environment locally, we know we're in the development environment, but when it's deployed to AWS, we're going to change that to production, right? And so that's how it will know. The code will know to behave one way locally, right, and one way when it's deployed remotely. And so this will be the netlify URL, but right now it's our local host for 3000. This is where we know that we're running, right? The IP address where we're running. This is so that the cookie can encode, the session library can encode the cookie, right? Because cookies, they hold identity, they hold information about somebody who's logged in, and so it could be a security risk, right? That people could still steal cookies, right? Now, if it's our machine, our computer, and we're the only ones who are using our computer, then, there's very little risk. But, if you're using a public machine, right, maybe at a library or something, right, and you log in, those credentials are stored in that cookie, in your browser. Now, say you don't log out, right, and you walk away from the machine. Somebody could come along, right, and peruse and steal your cookie, right, and use it somewhere else, right? So we want to make sure to keep those secure, and so this allows the cookies to be able to be encoded, right? So they're encrypted. Make sure that the communication is always secure, right? So anyway, yeah. So having configured that, we're going to load the environment. Load the environment variable using this library. So let's install that here. Okay, installed, so that we can then load the configuration, load the environment variables. So we can go to app.js. Oh, we had done that already. Okay, never mind. And what we're going to do is that the course, right, already have configuration to use Netlify and localhost 3000. We have that already, right? Let me run this. Yeah, so you have this connection string. We have that already. Process Mongo, blah blah blah. So in course, right? So we have Netlify, localhost 3000. Yeah, we have that. So I guess okay. So here instead of hard coding the secret here, right? That's bad practice, right? Because all this source code. So this is used for encrypting the cookie, making sure that it's secure when it's in transit, so nobody can decipher, if you're including username and password in there or user IDs in there. So you don't want to expose this secret, which is used to encrypt and decrypt the cookie. So usually what we do is that we use a process environment variable where we can configure it outside of the server, right? Like we did here in the environment variable, we're using the secret of your super secret, right? Here. Okay. Say, blah, blah, this stays the same, okay? And then, okay, now if we are not in development, so right now we're in development, right? Because node environment is development right now, right? In the environment variable here is development. Now, but if you're not in development, right? So maybe you're in production or QA or something else, right? Meaning your server is not running locally on our machine, it's running somewhere in render.com or whatever. Usually those servers are behind a proxy server, right? Maybe like Nginx or something. So there's two hops, right, to talk to the actual server. Like a load balancer is in front before you actually hit your server. So you need to turn on proxy and say, okay, well, I know that the cookies, right, there's going to be an intermediate server, right, that is going to then send the request again to the actual server. So you turn that on. Also, we're going to say to be able to, you need to tell it what is the IP address of the actual server, right, that is receiving your requests, right? In our case, it's just plain old localhost 4000, right? But when this is deployed on render.com, it'll be whatever that the URL of the actual server where this is running on render.com. So that needs to be configured too. Okay. So anyway, so that's good. So now that we have that, we're not going to need current user. We don't want a single instance of current user, right? Because that doesn't work, right? That means that only one person can be logged in at any one time. Instead, this is information that should be different for every single user. So if I log in as Alice, right, or I sign up as Alice or Bob or whatever, the current user should be Alice. But if it's Bob, then this should be Bob, right? If it's John, then it would be John, okay? And And so different people that are logging in or signing up will have a different version of the current user. Okay? And the way we do that is with a new object available in the requests. See that? This request, that session, that's a brand new object that is in there, that gets put in there by our new session library, right? Which intercepts all the requests, looks at all the headers, checks to see all the cookies, right? And depending on the cookie that it gets, it has a map that says, oh, well, for this cookie, this is a session, right? And for this other cookie, this other session. So it has like a hash table, right? That uses the cookie ID, right? Cookie IDs are unique, right? As an index, right? Into this hash table, which has multiple session objects. So by the time your request reaches us here, request that session will be one thing for a browser that Alice is using with one cookie ID, but it'll be a different session object for, if the request comes from a browser from Bob, you'll have a different cookie ID. So this object here is different, per user. And so now we can either write to the session, we can store stuff in there that is specific to that particular user. So I can store here, the Alice object, if it's Alice who's signing up, or it would be the Bob object if it's Bob who's signing up, right? So that's, and when I come in later on to sign in, I can also store, right, the user, and but then when I do the profile, I can read from the session, right? I can read from the session and says, oh, this was a user who is logged in. If it's Alice, right, or if it's John, or if it's Bob, it'll be a different request session object, per cookie. That means that whatever I stored in there, right, will be a different object, right? It will either be Alice, John, or whatever. Okay. All right. So let's do that. Let's re-implement the route here. So in the routes, we're not going to have the current user anymore. That's gone, and now we have to, everywhere where we had a current user, we need to re-implement it, right? So let's do that. So for sign up, right, we're going to now this be a local variable. So this current user is now a local variable, right? Not that global variable that we had earlier. And we are going to store the current user in the section here, right? So that we can remember, oh, this is the current user who's logged in. It's Alice, it's Bob, it's whatever, right? So same thing for the sign in, right? Now this is going to be a local user, a local constant like that, right? And I'm going to check to see. Sign in, current user. Okay, this is adding some error messaging, right? Saying, if there is a user, then I'm going to store it, right? And I'm going to respond with the current user. But if there was no, if I wasn't able to log in, right? If the credentials were wrong and I couldn't find the user, then I'm going to send back and unable to log in. Try again. And then a profile, consists of fetching the current user, right? Not from the global variable, but from the session, right? So here in the profile, I'm going to look up the current user. If I don't have a current user, I'm going to respond with the status 401, that so I can send back an error, right? Otherwise, I'm just going to send back the actual user. And finally, logging out just consists of not making the user null, but destroying the session. So kind of like forgetting about the cookie, making the cookie invalid, right? So if you use that cookie ever again, I'm not gonna honor it anymore, right? It's a stale cookie. So any information, identifying information for that particular user is gone, right? I forget about our prior conversation. I don't know you anymore, right? Okay, so that's on the server side. We're done on the server. So now on the client side, right, we also need to make a few modifications, right? Now on the client side, the login in and whatnot, right, in the client, there it's using a version of the Axios library that doesn't know how to use cookies, right? It doesn't know what a cookie is. Well, actually it does, but by default, Axios is configured not to use cookies, right? So none of this would work because Axios would not send any cookies. Even if the server would come back saying, hey, here's a cookie, Axios would just ignore it, right? So we need to turn that on by telling it that we do want credentials, right? So we're going to use the Axios library to create an instance. We say Axios. Okay, so yeah. Axios is saying, okay, well, I'm going to create a new instance of Axios, but it has credentials. And so we're saying Axios.create with credentials true. Now, whenever we're going to talk to the server, if we want the communication to participate in the session, we have to use this version of Axios. But now, not all communication needs to know about cookies, right? So you could, for the ones who don't need a cookie, you can use the normal Axios. But if you do want to participate in the session, if you're asking the server to remember the conversation going back and forth, then you have to use this version of Axios, right? So certainly for signing in, profile, sign up for this type of interaction with the server, I do want to use this new version of Axios, right? So I'm just going to replace, right, all my Axios calls with this new instance of Axios. Okay, everybody good? All right, yeah, so let's try it out. Let's see if we need to restart the server. Okay, this was done, and this one, okay, it was in the profile. I'm not logged in. So now notice that I am getting errors, right? Because I am responding with an error. Nobody's logged in, and I'm asking for a profile. That's good. So let's try this out. So we're gonna go Canvas, the dashboard. There we go. We're in the dashboard. We're going to account. Let's sign in. So this should work the same way. You say Alice, Bob, and sign in. So hopefully this works the same way. Let's see. Sign in 4 or 1. Unable to log in. Try again later. Interesting. Okay, so that worked. I might need to restart the server. Let me restart the server. Restart the server. Let me restart the server over here. Let's try it again. Sign in. Okay. Let's clear that. Let's see. Alice, 1, 2, 3, sign in. Okay, that worked. I needed to just restart the server. Okay, so I'm logged in. Now, let's try the same test that we did earlier. So we're going to start, I'm going to open up another Chrome window, but in incognito, right? So has no idea about the prior session. So if I do a localhost 3000, I go to Canvas, I go to account. Notice that if I go to profile, notice that it doesn't know that anybody's logged in, right? Not like before, right? Now, if I sign in as someone else, Bob, here's Bob, and then 1, 2, 3. So I'm signed in as Bob while simultaneously I'm logged in as Alice. Right, so here's Alice. Notice if I refresh, notice that it's returning the profile for Alice. Whereas here, if I refresh, right, notice it's returning the information for Bob. See that? And the way it works is that they are using different cookies. We can look at the cookies here. You look at the network, right? If I do a refresh, right? So there's my profile query, right? I can look at the headers. They're going out from the client to the server. If I scroll down, we can see the cookie. Here's the request header, and here's the cookie, right? So it has an ID, this cookie ID, which is this one. It's a very long cookie ID. That was generated by the server. The server asked the browsers, hey, here's a cookie, store it for me. Next time you come back, pass it back to me so I can know who you are, right? And so this ID is, ends with SO6E, right? Now, if I look here, inspect, we can look at the network. If I refresh, we can see the profile query, right? We can see in the header, if I scroll down and look at the cookie, notice that it's a different ID, right? It ends with, IQPQ, right? Whereas this one is, SO6E, right? And all requests are like that. So notice, remember this, right? It's SO6E. If I refresh, right? If I go to the profile and look at the header, it's still the same cookie. See that? SO6E. That is how the server remembers that it's from you, right? That is how the server can come here, right? And in the profile, this object is different, right? If it comes from the cookie SO6E, right, it'll be one instance for this session object, right? But if it comes from, XYZ7, right, it'll be a different session object, right? Instance here, right? They all work as hash tables. You can put anything in these objects. They're hash tables. So you store stuff like that to remember things about either Alice or Bob or whatever. I can remember Bob's shopping cart, or I can remember Alice's shopping cart, right? And so I can store in there any data structure I want. Typically, we don't store too much, right? Only the minimum information to remember anything about you. Make sense?